So how would you react if you learned you were the Messiah? Great honor or heavy burden? That's the question director Martin Scorsese, along with writers Paul Schrader and Jay Cox, once asked when they adapted a 1955 novel by Nikos Kazantzakis. I'm Whitaker Martin of Whideo Reviews, and today's second look is The Last Temptation of Christ. Released on August 12, 1988, The Last Temptation of Christ is an interpretation of the later life of the famous historical figure Jesus. Far from the deified person that we often hear about, this is a complicated individual who reluctantly executes the actions commanded to him by an otherworldly presence called God. Furthermore, his teachings are prone to misinterpretation, and they come into contrast with the disciples he works with, who have agendas of their own. There's a decided contrast going on in this film. On one hand, it's a fairly religious picture, reverent of its central character. On the other hand, it very much tries to demythologize Jesus. And while I can't say it pulls off the balancing act perfectly, the 166-minute runtime is arguably too long for this story, and it tends to revel in the abstract too often, I do very much appreciate the film's effort, and it offers some unique interpretations of its characters. Let's go through the plot. Jesus of Nazareth, played by Willem Dafoe, is a carpenter living in Roman-occupied Israel. He makes crosses to help with Roman executions because he keeps hearing voices in his head, voices from an otherworldly god. He makes the crosses in hopes that this god will see him as a bad man and leave him alone, but the voices persist, much to Jesus' chagrin.
You think it's a blessing to know what God wants? I'll tell you what he wants. He wants to push me over. Can't he see what's inside of me? All my sins.
We all sin.
Not my sins. I'm a liar. A hypocrite. I'm afraid of everything. I don't ever tell the truth. I don't have the courage.
After an encounter with a monastery master who turns out to be dead, Jesus decides to take up being God's Messiah, spreading messages of hope, love, and forgiveness in his harsh climate. His first test comes when he has to save the prostitute Mary Magdalene, played by Barbara Hershey, from an angry mob led by Irvin Kershner.
Who has never sinned? Who? Whoever that is. Come up here! And throw these!
I have nothing to hide.
Good. Take this. It's bigger. Be careful, Zebedee. There is a God. He's seen you cheat your workers. He's seen you with that widow. What's her name?
Judas.
Aren't you afraid God will paralyze you if you lift that stone? That your arm will wither? That you lose all strength?
Jesus manages to earn some followers, including Judas Iscariot, played by Harvey Keitel. This is a far more interesting portrayal of Judas than the sniveling coward we usually get. Here we have a dedicated Israelite who's quickly finding his views don't match up with his new mentor.
I want freedom for the soul.
No, that's what I can't accept. That's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. First you free the body, then you free the spirit. The Romans come first. You don't build a house from the roof down. You build it from the foundation up.
The foundation is the soul.
The foundation is the body. That's where you must begin.
I cannot understand for the life of me why Keitel was nominated for a Razzie. This is the best performance in the film. Jesus continues to spread his message and starts to prove he really does have powers from God. He's able to cast out demons, cure blindness, and bring the dead back to life. But his increasing influence threatens the Romans in charge. No, your eyes do not deceive you. That's David Bowie as Roman official Pontius Pilate.
You know, it's one thing to want to change the way that people live, but you want to change how they think, how they feel.
All I'm saying is that change will happen with love, not with killing.
Either way, it's dangerous. It's against Rome. It's against the way the world is. And killing or loving, it's all the same. It simply doesn't matter how you want to change things. We don't want them changed.
For those familiar with the tenets of Christianity, these story beats probably sound familiar, but it's the interpretation of these events that make this a unique picture, plus a variety of audio and visual tricks to add authenticity. Let's break down some of the technicals. John Beard was the production designer, and I gotta say, this version of Israel does not look like a place I'd want to visit. And I mean that as a compliment. Gravel and sand are present everywhere, and the sets have a handmade, worn-down feel to them. It helps the film was shot in Morocco, too. It's easy to buy this as another time and place. Editing was by Thelma Schoonmaker, and cinematography was by Michael Ballhaus, two longtime Scorsese collaborators. Together, they come up with some good imagery. In this scene where Jesus rails against the corruption of a Jewish temple, the low camera angle emphasizes his power. And when he throws coins into the air, a cutaway makes us question the value of money. There's good visual representations as well. The legendary adversary of God, Satan, is shown as pure fire here. You can't even see the source. That's really clever. Finally, I have to compliment the music in this film. We see a lot of live music being played by instruments native to the Middle East and North Africa, really adding to the ambiance. And the film score by Peter Gabriel is one of the best I've ever heard. A great combination between a Middle Eastern sound and something otherworldly. I think this could have been the start of a great career in film composition for Peter Gabriel, but to be fair, that probably didn't interest him. Still, it's great music that really complements the film. Returning to the story, this is where things can be hit and miss. As I mentioned before, the 166-minute runtime is arguably too long for this story. Cutting some of the dead space between conversations would have helped. Also, some of the character motivations aren't entirely clear. For example, after that stoning scene where Jesus rescues Mary, as he escorts her out, the crowd just decides to follow him anyway. What, were they so excited about the stoning that they decided, well, I guess this is the main attraction instead? Then he proceeds to make a speech that gets misinterpreted, and shortly later, we see him steadily accumulating followers. I get the impression from this shot that over the course of the day, he manages to get this following, and he doesn't have a lot of actions to his name by this point. Maybe director Martin Scorsese was implying that this is a very long passage of time and he's making speeches in between, but that's not the impression I got. Finally, the film tries to strike an odd balance between deconstructing Jesus' legend and reveling in his abstract beliefs. For example, when Jesus inevitably has to be crucified, he's not clear on why this is necessary for, quote, bringing God and man together. Yes, Jesus does state that God only tells him a little at a time, but it's never clarified why such a drastic action must be necessary in the first place. The abstract should have been more concrete.
He has borne our faults. He was wounded for our transgressions, yet he opened not his mouth. Despised and rejected by all, he went forward without resisting, like a lamb led to the slaughter.
I don't understand.
And it is when the film goes for the concrete and deconstructing the legend when it's at its best. Heck, at one point, it's made clear that it's not the truth that matters, but what people want to believe that matters.
You started all this, now you can't stop it. All those people who believe me will grab you and kill you.
No, that wouldn't happen.
How do you know? You see, you don't know how much people need God. You don't know how happy he can make them. He can make them happy to do anything. He can make them happy to die, and they'll die. All for the sake of Christ.
That's the late, great Harry Dean Stanton in a terrific cameo performance. And that gets to the final part of my evaluation, the acting of the film. There has been some criticism about clearly American actors playing Middle Eastern roles, leading some to remark that some of the roles were miscast. However, I kind of like the unconventional casting. The American cast doesn't try to play the roles as Middle Eastern. They play the roles as American, which is fine with me. Most of Jesus' followers are played by New Yorkers. Their strong Brooklyn accents give the impression that they're coming from the streets of New York. Given that they're now fighting on the streets of Jerusalem, I think this is an appropriate call.
I would just like to be able to worship in the temple. I mean really worship, without Roman banners and soldiers. That's what I'd like.
Of course.
I want to go back to Harvey Keitel for a bit, for his terrific turn as Judas. What a relief it is to see a performance with so much complexity and nuance for a historically caricatured figure. This isn't miscasting, this is good acting.
What you want, I want. That's why he brought us together. It's God's plan.
I come to kill you when you help me. That's God's plan. These voices you hear, it's God's voice, only you understand it? Well, you better make me understand it too.
Finally, how about Willem Dafoe as Jesus? Well, while he does wallow in pity a little too often, for the most part, I kind of like him as the reluctant Messiah. He's unsure and struggling, but also devout and passionate about his convictions. His public speeches often have a raw, unpolished feel to them. In short, he's human.
You think God belongs only to you? He doesn't. God's an immortal spirit who belongs to everybody, to the whole world. You think you're special? God is not an Israelite.
I haven't even shown the final part of the film, which is what happens after the crucifixion. There's a good turn by Juliet Keitel, just 12 years old at the time, as a guardian angel, but we're getting into spoiler territory, so it's up to you to watch her scenes. Though the film does have flaws, its good qualities ultimately make this a fulfilling experience. Scorsese's memorable pictures often take bold chances with their storytelling, and this is a bold chance. I like how this movie is cast, and I like how the conflicts of Jesus are portrayed, both his internal struggle to carry out a divine will and his external struggle to teach love and compassion in a hardened world. I like the look of the film with its minimalistic earthly feel, and I love the Peter Gabriel score that complements it. This may not be one of the great Scorsese films, but it is an interesting one, and for that I recommend it. So go ahead and leave a comment on what you thought about The Last Temptation of Christ, and if there's a movie you think deserves a second look. My name is Whitaker Martin, and I thank you for watching this installment on Whideo Reviews. I'll see you next time.